the line with us right now is a gentleman many of you are going to remember from Louisiana Live, did the show for nearly 5 years, and he's gone on to bigger and better things at WRKF Radio in Baton Rouge, and pretty soon you'll be able to hear his voice on that wonderful 89.3 FM. Jim Engster, how are you today?
Good to be with you, William. Always a pleasure. Every time I talk with you, I'm doing fine. So nice to visit with you. It's been too long.
Very much so, and of course a lot of our good listeners in the Thibodaux area miss you as well, though we do appreciate the job that Don Grady does on the air. I take it, if my memory's right, you're actually originally from Little Rock?
Originally from New Orleans, but I spent 10 years of my youth in Little Rock and came to LSU on the day that Elvis died, August 16, 1977. And coincidentally, William Taylor, you were born on Elvis's, 34th birthday, January 8th, 1969, like 4 days before the New York Jets won Super Bowl III.
Quite a pretty, that was a pretty good game. With, of course, I wasn't.
You weren't watching that day?
No, I'm afraid not. I must have been in the other room, or either the old black and white Philco must have broke down.
It was in color, I remember. January 12th, 1969.
Yeah, it was.
Really name it. And the New York Jets beat the Baltimore Colts 16-7. William Taylor was 4 days old. You just missed being born on Richard Nixon's birthday, too.
That's right. He was born on January 9th,
right,
if I'm right. And because I do have footage from Super Bowl III, because I believe for Baltimore, LSU player Dennis Gaubetz was with them.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Super Bowl III, Baltimore was, 13-1 in the regular season.
Right.
And the Jets had lost 3 times in the old AFL. They were 17-point underdogs. The 2 preceding Super Bowls had been won handily by Green Bay, so it was a major moment in the history of the American Football League, and ultimately I think that was the dividing line between the AFL and the NFL.
Very much so. And then a year later, our friend Hank Stram and his Kansas City Chiefs led the AFL to victory in Super Bowl IV over the Vikings 23-7. And while that was the last official game with an AFL member, it just reassured what had happened the previous year with Game 3.
Yeah, that was a big upset too. In old Tulane Stadium, and Henry Stram was carried off the field by the big cat, Ernie Ladd.
A gentleman, of course, who we all know from Louisiana Live, and before that, pro wrestling and pro football. In fact, when he carried Hank off the field, that was Ernie's first full year out of football.
Well, he wasn't playing much for the Chiefs, but he was there for the victory ride, and he must have still been pretty strong, because even then, Henry Stram was a load.
Oh, very much so. And, of course, appropriately, as we're talking, Coach Hank's birthday was this past Saturday, turned 81.
Yeah, January 3rd, same birth date as Jim Everett.
Very much so. And I believe you mentioned to me that we're loaded with Saints birthdays, quarterback birthdays in January. You mentioned Everett. Ironically, tomorrow, well, at the time we're taping this tomorrow, Billy Joe Holbert's birthday, and Jake Delhomme's birthday is a few days down the road.
Yeah, and I think there's another one in January as well.
And
Tommy Hodson.
Tommy Hodson, there you go. So we're loaded with them. And ironically, you mentioned Tommy Hodson from LSU. You must have been pretty excited Sunday night with that national championship victory.
Yeah, championships don't come too often in football at LSU, about every 45 years. Actually, when you look back through the years, they won the championship in 1908 when they went 10-0, although they were not the AP and UPI polls at that time. But so they went 1908, 1958, and now 2003. So they're cutting it a little bit. It went from 50 to 45. I guess the next one will be in 2043, William, when you will be celebrating your 75th birthday.
Well, let's hope I make it that far.
I'm sure you will. But you're a good man. You've got a lot of talent. One of the most diverse people I know, between your passion for sports and weather and just life in general. And I think most people know that you're a working man during the day and a broadcaster at night. You're ubiquitous and talented, and I'm glad you're a friend of mine, and certainly I was pleased to have you contribute as much as you did through the years on Louisiana Live.
And not to mention, I'm still a member of the Bill Cullen fan club.
Bill Cullen fan club. I guess Remember that?
Yep, I actually, the other day I went to a flea market and they were actually selling the home version of I Guess.
Really?
At one of the booths over there.
But he hosted like 13 different game shows, didn't he?
Oh, goodness. That show, 3 on a Match. He hosted a show called Child's Play and Hot Potato. Of course, his real fame is the original host of The Price is Right. Bill Cullen had a tremendous career for a very long time and until he passed away in 1990. But yeah, he lived a good long time, and I still think to this day, while most people, the younger people, are going to remember Bob Barker as a great host, no doubt in my mind, I'm always going to remember Bill Cullen, because no matter what kind of show they put him in, he always had a good pulse and a good presence with people.
And I always thought he looked and sounded like John Ferguson.
Yeah, and you had mentioned a funny story. If you want to go ahead and tell it to the listeners, didn't you say there was a funny story at a banquet about someone telling a joke about John Ferguson looking like Bill Cullen?
Well, when I was in school at LSU, we had a reporter for the Reveille. I think his name was Jeff Renshaw, if I remember right. And he wrote a story, I don't know if it was tongue-in-cheek or not, but he said that they had a special guest at the LSU press luncheon when Jerry Stovall gave his weekly address to the media. The game show host Bill Cullen was there. It wasn't Bill Cullen, it was John Ferguson.
Oh, yeah. And I know John Ferguson's been on your show a good many times, talking about so many memories of LSU. I liked it when you had him up there to tell the 30th anniversary of the clock game between LSU and Ole Miss.
Yeah, it was November 4th, 1972, and that was Ferguson's most memorable call. Burt Jones to Brad Davis. LSU beats Ole Miss 17-16 as Rusty Jackson kicks the point after time has expired. Ironically, Ferguson, who called LSU games for more than 40 years, he missed out on the championship season and the Billy Cannon run the following year because in those days the announcer was not hired by the university but was employed by the radio station, and WJBO, which had the rights for most of the period over the last half century, didn't have the rights those 2 years. So J.C. Politz had the honor of being at the mic for the most memorable season up until now. And I suppose that's another irony in that J.C. Politz and Jim Hawthorne are connected to the 2 championship teams, and John Ferguson, who to many of us will always be the voice of the Tigers, was never a champion, at least never a champion in calling the games for a team that won a title, but certainly he was a champion as far as his ability. He was one of a kind and still has the voice. Now into his 80s, he still has that baritone voice, and I'm sure he could move from the Tiger Athletic office to the booth at Tiger Stadium a few yards away and do just fine.
Mm-hmm. You know, also something else we'd like to talk about, because one of the things I would mention on your show, and we played a couple of sound bites, I believe, on what would be the last show you and I did together on Louisiana Live, was your interest in wrestling. Did you always like pro wrestling as a kid?
Yeah, I used to go to Robinson Auditorium in Little Rock every Tuesday night when I was a kid, and see Danny Hodge and Jack Briscoe and Skandar Akbar, Ernie Ladd, all the familiar names. For several years I did that. It was kind of a ritual. And one night, William Taylor, I went, and the referee for the evening was one Joe Lewis.
Wow.
Talk about a change in career. Here's a guy who was heavyweight champion for 13 years, had 25 title defenses successfully, and he in the late 60s, that would have been the very late 60s, he was a referee at a wrestling match in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Wow, pretty incredible.
Yeah.
When you think about it. And also one gentleman I like to talk about who we met, and people think I joke when I mention his name, but as a kid I do have very fond memories of him as a broadcaster, because to me he was perfect for the 60s, 70s, and 80s when it came to wrestling announcers, and that's Boyd Pierce.
Yeah. He was a fixture and kind of a fellow who attained legendary status in this region of the country for those who followed the king of sports. He was something else.
And of course, he was also, I believe, a native of Dallas. Had done a lot of wrestling work over there as well before he retired. I believe it was in 1984. The gentleman who replaced him, Jim Ross, who we all know now for the World Wrestling, now called the WWE, formerly the WWF, he was on the sidelines in the Oklahoma bench during the national championship game. So apparently being old, as he calls himself now, good old JR, has a lot of pull, I guess.
Yeah, and Oklahoma, of course, has a great tradition of producing wrestling greats. That's a school that is as synonymous with wrestling as it is with football. Cowboy Bill Watts.
Oh, very much so.
Right.
And you mentioned Danny Hodge a few minutes ago, and in my era, Steve Dr. Death Williams.
Yeah. So, did Brian Bosworth ever wrestle?
No, he actually, my memory is correct, when his pro football career ended, he went straight into the movies.
Really? And
now you can see him on TBS. He's the studio analyst with Ernie Johnson for their college football games.
The Boz.
The Boz, and he's still the Boz, though his hair is a lot better than it was when he played. He'll never, ever get away from the Boz, I can guarantee you that.
He was a guy who was considered to be invincible until Bo Jackson gave him an attitude adjustment.
Yeah, that was one heck of a Monday night game in Seattle. Yeah. And I still remember that and will for a long time, because as they say, I believe Dan Dierdorf said it best, 240 beats 220 easy. So,
remember when Bo played in the Superdome against the Saints?
That would have been in, I think it was 88.
Yep. 1988, if I remember right. Saints won 20-6.
Right.
And Bo carried 2 times for 40 yards and then said his leg hurt him and sat out the rest of the game.
That's right, and the Saints luckily had a pretty sound win thanks to some good running by Ironhead Hayward in that contest. So, yeah, it's, I tell you what, knowing you, and in fact, that's the one thing I wanted to lead to before I forgot, was how we first got connected was actually back in 1999, which I think was around the beginning of the second year of Louisiana Live, and I had sent an email to you about some of the different things I had done in broadcasting, and when you put me on for the first time, it was the Friday before the season opening, the season opener in 1999, and Ricky Williams' debut at home against Carolina, and you had me go on to talk about some of those crazy stories from the early years of the Saints, including when they hired the astronaut Dick Gordon, and when they hired Burt Rose as the GM in '67, and because I've noticed from listening to you on your show, I know besides loving current sports, you also seem to really, really be a walking almanac when it comes to history of sports.
Well, I think part of that has to do with growing up with it. Probably know more about 1969 than I do 1999, William. But the Saints, of course, have been one of the most colorful franchises. I don't think anyone can deny that, even though they haven't been one of the most successful. It's hard to believe now that Tom Benson has owned the team longer than John Meekin did.
Yeah, that's very true. Tom Benson bought the team in '85, so 2004 will be his 20th year of ownership. I think it was about 18 years for John Meekin. So it goes to show you how time's really flown. And but I tell you what, you've like I said, you've got a pretty good head on your shoulders when it comes to names and numbers and sports history. And this is going to sound like a silly question, but is there any secret or trick that you use to memorize all these numbers of so many great players and statistics?
Well, I remember back in 1973 when the New York Knicks beat the Lakers for the NBA title. Jerry Lucas was the Knicks center, and he had memorized a New York phone directory. So I don't know that absorbing information is that remarkable when you consider what he's done. I don't have a photographic memory, obviously he does, but I think a lot of it has to do with just being interested in it. And when you're a kid, you're so fascinated with everything around you that a lot of that soaks in, and I think that's one of the reasons why I can retrieve things that happened in the 60s and 70s when I was a little kid and your mind's not cluttered with all the everyday things that go along with being an adult. So makes it a little easier, but I don't think that I have any more remarkable capacity to absorb information and retrieve it than anybody else. And if that were the case, I would have been a 4.0 rather than a 3.0 student at LSU.
Ah, very true. And I didn't even know that fact about you. Well, listen, before we head out, there's a couple other things I want to ask you about. One of the most memorable shows I'll ever remember you doing on Louisiana Live is because it's one of the few times I have ever heard you cut a guest off for being improper. And that's when you had, I believe the lady's name was Sweet Connie.
Sweet Connie.
And because I think she was living in Arkansas at the time you interviewed her, right?
She still lives in Little Rock. She is the Sweet Connie from the Grand Funk Railroad song, We're an American Band. Last night in Little Rock, Sweet Connie was doing her act. She had the whole show, and that's a natural fact. Well, she claims to have had a groping session with Bill Clinton in 1984. By the way, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of that alleged groping session.
Mm-hmm.
And she has also claimed to have become familiar with many rock stars and others like Richard Carpenter, who have come through Little Rock on the concert tour.
Mm-hmm.
And she got a lot too graphic on the show, so she didn't adhere to the ground rules, so we had to say goodbye to Sweet Connie.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have a feeling, William, that it didn't break her heart.
No, I don't think so. And for a minute there, I thought we were going to have to call Grizzly Smith and have her suspended for 30 days or something. That,
years.
yeah, that was pretty outrageous. And the one other thing people will probably remember you for, and it's not of your doing, but do you think you and George are ever going to get along?
George and Homa?
Yeah.
Oh, George is my new friend.
Mm-hmm.
George Lynn from Homa. Has he been calling, by the way?
To my knowledge, on Louisiana Live, no. I really haven't heard him much lately.
I wonder what happened to him.
I don't know. I guess.
I'm worried about it.
Well, I was going to say, my theory was that I think he just loved to argue with you, and that the fact that Don and Jeff, I don't think are as argumentative, if I can use that word, as you. I think George probably doesn't seem to be as excited about that.
Well, I know George is coming up on his 70th birthday, the 10th of March, so, and George Lynn is his name, so if you can find him in Homa, I suggest that you wish George good speed in becoming a septuagenarian.
Well, very much so, and yeah, he's one of those great characters. Of course, you had quite a few of them. I'll always remember Mr. Leroy in Independence, and Paul in Natchitoches, of course, James in Metairie, Elwood in New Orleans, Mickey in Monroe, and I know I'm going to forget a bunch of people.
A lot of them, that's right.
And quite some interesting characters along the way, both in the news hours and in the sports hour. And it's yeah, I think it's real interesting how the listening audience really started to get to know just the callers, not just yourself. It really, the 3 hours you did every day really was an interesting blend of news and callers.
Well, thank you. It was an honor to be on the air and certainly to be on KTIB, great station. One of our inaugural stations when we started June 22nd, 1998. Pete Maravich's birthday, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
KTIB was with us right up until the end and continues to carry the show today. So, Oldies 640's a spectacular station, and I always enjoy being on KTIB, and certainly anytime I can visit with you, William Taylor, on or off the air, it's a good day for me.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And before we head on out, I understand you'll be getting back on the airwaves as well at WRKF 89.3 FM, correct?
Yeah, that's the plan. Come March to begin doing a program somewhat similar to what we were doing on Louisiana Live, and there in the mornings at 9 o'clock. And we'll start in March and see how it goes. But I have some great memories from the 5 years and 4 months that I did Louisiana Live, and whatever success that comes my way from here on will be in direct relation to the experience I had as the host of that program.
Thanks for listening to this special presentation of Oldie 640 KTIB-AM Thibodaux, Louisiana, proudly celebrating 50 years of South Louisiana broadcasting.
Okay, tape is rolling. 3, 2. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we 3, 2. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue the William Taylor Radio